when it comes to file storage, we don't upload and store our files on our backend server because that would just enormously increase the cost of running a server because of the memory requirements. And secondly, we won't be able to run our servers in a serverless fashion because we would be reliant on the file system to actually store the files, right? So these two reasons are why it's not recommended to store your files on the disk of your backend server. So where do we actually store our files if not the backend server directly? The most popular approach to this is to actually have an external storage bucket, which you use external services for that. For example, AWS's S3 or Google Cloud's storage bucket, or Azure has its own storage bucket. So in this video, I'll be talking about primarily the storage bucket called AWS's S3, that is Storage Simplified Storage Service, and or probably simple storage service, doesn't matter. I'll be talking about that and how you can use S3 to handle file uploads and store files, because S3 is insanely cheap, and I think that is what most of us are going to be using when it comes to storing files. Now, even in using an external storage bucket, there are two major methods or two major routes which you can take to handling file uploads. One is that you directly use your client to upload files directly to your storage bucket. You use a pre-signed or a pre-authorized URL for that, which we'll see in this video. And the other is that you use your client, or the user directly uploads the file to your server first using multi-part form data. And then your server passes that and then uploads the file to the storage bucket. Now, of course, both of them have their advantages and disadvantages, and we'll be looking at both of them very closely in this video. So, right, these are the two approaches: server-side file upload and client directly uploads the file. So what happens in server-side uploads is that your client or your user, or maybe even another server, sends data to your own server, which will handle the file uploads using multi-part form data. And then your server somehow passes that data. For example, if you're using Node.js, you'll be using something known as Multer to parse that form data. And then you'll be uploading it to your storage bucket. We'll be looking at all of this in much detail in the coding section of the video. And similarly, what happens in the client? If you're using the client for uploading, that is, the client can directly upload files. So in that, you don't want to give direct access of your storage bucket. Even over here, we'll have a very restricted usage of the storage bucket, but over here it's even more. That is, you don't share secrets and stuff like that with the client ever. So what you do is that you actually generate a pre-signed URL, which you can think of as a pre-authorized URL, which the user can then go ahead and upload the files to the storage bucket, which works out great. Now you must be wondering that because I have a pre-signed URL from the server, then the client can maliciously use that URL to upload actually any file. And maybe if you're providing storage services, or you're restricting the file size that the user can upload, then user can probably maliciously upload whatever they want, right? But that's actually not the case. You have very proper restrictive measures that you could take when creating a pre-signed URL. You can make sure that there's a specific file type only which the user can upload. You can also specify the size. You can also specify the checksum, which is like the hash and the file size and the file type, and all of them combine and use that to create sort of a hash which cannot be changed, which means the user can only and only upload that single file for which you've created the pre-signed URL. So yeah, there are a lot of security measures which you could take. Now, where would you usually use a server-side upload? So server-side upload is usually costly. It's more costly, and of course it increases the load on the server because your server is more involved now. But it does have some use cases. For example, if you want to process the images before uploading it to the storage bucket, or you want to just process it or minify it, or probably create a zip out of the images, and which is a very important use case. For example, if you're dealing with a lot of text to image or image to image models, then they don't accept a lot of photos directly. They expect a zip to be uploaded. So in that case, this approach becomes very important, that you accept multi-part form data from the client, and then you parse that data into a zip on your server, and then upload that zip to the storage bucket. So yeah, so that's one of the use cases of using server-side file uploads. And for clients, I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? For example, if you want to give the user to the ability to upload his own display picture or any images, or create an Instagram type app or Twitter type app, of course, you need users to upload their own assets like uh, videos or photos, showcasing whatever they want to. So yeah, all of that does become important. Right, now let's look at the code. And to be honest, the code of both of them, that is handling server-side file uploads and client-side file uploads, are very similar once you get the gist of it. As you can see, I'm talking about some put object commands, which is very, very common in both of them. And once you get the understanding of this, you won't be dependent on any language, or can I only use it inside Next.js or just inside a Go SDK. Once you get the hang of it, you can use it anywhere. This guide is going to be very language agnostic. Yeah, but then that said, I'm going to be showing it inside my Next.js projects because that is what I primarily use to build my projects. So now when it comes to storing files, then of course the most important thing that you will be doing is creating your own storage bucket. So I'm inside my AWS console and inside the S3 section. And over here, I'll just be going and creating a bucket. Now the most important thing when you'll be creating a bucket is, of course, the bucket name and the bucket region. Both of them are very important when you'll be accessing your AWS buckets. Now one thing to keep in mind is that the bucket name needs to be unique across all the instances of AWS S3. That is not only in your AWS or AWS console, it's just to be unique globally. So this is something that I've created for this. I'm not sure if this is unique, but we'll see. And the region I've chosen is Mumbai right now. Um, and this is an important thing. So right now I've blocked all public access. That is, nobody can access my S3 bucket externally. And I can only access it right now using the GUI of the AWS console, and that's only how I can. Yeah, so I've disabled bucket versioning and I'm not using tags right now. And now let's create the bucket. Great, so I guess this was unique. Now, since this bucket is not accessible externally, that is, nobody can just simply access it and upload to it or view it. It's very secure by default, which is great. But how am I, as the developer of the application or as the admin of this S3 bucket, going to ever get control of it? How can I programmatically upload to this and get fetch files or whatever it is that I want? So the way that we do that is using something known as IAM, which is you basically create different users with different permissions and give that user permission to access this bucket. You don't want your root user to have access to the bucket, because if that gets leaked, then basically your whole AWS console can be overridden, and I don't know what else can happen. It's like a huge security risk. So it's actually much better to create an IAM user with the capability to access that specific bucket only. And even in that specific bucket with very specific rules. That is, they can only put an object, that is, add an object to the bucket, delete an object from the bucket, and probably, yeah, I mean, these two are what is majorly required, and probably even getting the object. So these three are the major rules which I would think you should give to your user. uh let's see. So now I'll be naming it YouTube. This can be anything, doesn't matter. And now this is another important thing that we probably don't want to do. Do we want to provide user access to the AWS management console? That is, do we want to create an other console and give it credentials to have its own AWS console? Not required, right? Because it's a programmatic user. It's going to handle everything using code. So it doesn't need its own console. And of course, I'm not going to give it a console. And yeah, I can just go ahead and create the user. Where exactly did I add permissions to my bucket? I haven't yet. I need to attach policies to it. So the way that we do that is we go to policies and we create a new policy, which will be specifically for that user. And it will be S3. And in S3, these are the actions that I'm allowing it. So I can give it all access to S3. I wouldn't recommend it. Uh, so the three major things are get object, that is, the user will be able to get objects programmatically. He has the permission to get objects. He has the permission to put objects. That is, he can add objects to our bucket. And he can, of course, delete objects. Great. So these are the three permissions that I'm allowing the user to have, or I'm creating a policy for it. And another restriction is that it's not for every S3 bucket, but for a very specific bucket. So it's only for Spirit YT. That is the YouTube, that is the bucket name that I've given. Now I can have any object name over here because I want to give access to the whole bucket. Sure. Yeah, add. And now you can go ahead and simply create this policy. Need to give it a name. Done. And now inside my users, I'll go ahead and just attach a policy now. Add permissions, attach policies, YouTube, node. And you can attach this policy now. Add permissions. So now my user has access to my S3 bucket called Spirit YT, and he has three permissions specifically. That is, he can put objects, adding objects to the bucket, delete objects, removing objects from the bucket, and getting objects. That is, getting valid objects from the bucket to be displayed on the user side. These are the three things that they can do. And yeah, that's great. Now let's look at the two different implementations that we have on the server and the client side. So I'll first be showing you the client side because that is a little easier to understand. Once you get the hang of that, then we'll be moving on to the server side implementation. That is a server only implementation. Now this is inside a Next.js project, my own Next.js project for a product called Builder Form, which I've built. And in that, what I do is I'll show you where I'm using file uploads exactly. So over here, if you try it live, then what you'll notice is that I have a way to upload files as well. Yeah, this is the file upload. So how will the user be actually storing this file and how will he be viewing it? So even over here, this is a programmatic button which fetches the file from my S3 programmatically, and I've not given the access to the user to access any file they want. This can only be accessed because my S3 client, which I've configured inside this project, has access to the S3 bucket where this file is hosted, and it's sending in a GET request to do that. So the first thing that you'll notice over here is that I have an S3 client, which I'm getting from this AWS SDK client S3. And over here, I need the region, like I told you before, and I need two different things as well, which are the credentials. Now, how can I get these credentials? What are these credentials even? So remember that we had created an IAM user. Well, that IAM user has a secret and an access ID. It's something that we have not created yet, but we can with a simple click. Let's go to security credentials inside the IAM user we had created, which has the permission to get, put, and delete inside the S3 bucket. And we'll simply create the access, and it'll be for application running outside AWS. Next. And you can give it whatever you want, YT. Then we'll simply create the access key. And then you can copy this and move it to your environment variables, and you're done. Now, once your S3 client has been set up with the access key and the secret key that you get from AWS, what you'll be doing is that you'll be creating a separate route on your backend where you will be creating a way for you to actually get the signed URL. Now that signed URL is what will be used further for your client to upload the file directly to your bucket. So over here, for example, I'm creating a put object command, which I'm getting from, again, S3, the S3 SDK. Yeah, I'm getting it from the S3 SDK. You can find all of this on Google by simply searching. I'm not going to get into too much depth of coding. If you guys want a video for where I'm coding and actually building a whole application using S3, just drop a comment and I'll do that. But that's too time consuming right now. And it's more important for you to actually understand the concepts rather than how it actually works on a code level, because you can figure that out easily. Yeah, so over here, what I'm doing is that I'm sending a request to get the signed URL with the put object command. Remember, with the put object command. And over here, of course, I'm providing all the details, the bucket and the key. The important thing to note is that over here, even the bucket name has been uh, reserved only for my server. That is, my client does not know anything about it as of now. Um, yeah, and I've given it a 5 minutes expiry because sure, and I'm returning in the URL. I'm also returning the file key, which is for my use case. It might not be for your use case. For your use case, the only important thing is the URL. And if you might notice another thing over here is that I'm also providing it the checksum. This is some sort of hash that I'm providing to make sure that only this file can specifically be uploaded. Um, and on the and on the client side, that is the file input side, what is happening is that I'm awaiting for the signed URL mutation, and I'm providing in all the details that to my API. This is the body of my API basically, where I'm sending my file name, size, type, and the checksum, and that this is again business logic on my end, and then simply awaiting a put request to that URL, to the signed URL, and that's it. My file has been uploaded to S3. Now, if you will be trying it on your end, it won't work for you so simply, because there's another thing that you'll need to change. So the other thing is that inside your S3 bucket, it cannot be accessed by any origin right now. So you need to add permissions inside your bucket to actually give it access to cross origin resources. Yeah, so over here, I'll just be pasting something that I have. Yeah. So the allowed origin right now is 3000. It can vary depending on where you host your front end on your local machine. And I've allowed the put and get methods. I haven't allowed delete now. You can do that. And yeah, and that's why it's very important for you to actually have a separate bucket for local development and a separate bucket for actual production development, because you don't want to allow any origin on your production development, right? So you wouldn't be very specific when it comes to production development, and specifying localhost 3000 is probably not a good idea. So this is something that you need to add. Yeah, pretty good so far. Now, how is this different from the server heavy, that is involving the server to parse the files and then upload it? Well, it's not actually that different, right? So this is the mono repo that I was talking about where I'm using file uploads. So this is for another product that I was building called Peacocking, where users can come in and generate professional thumbnails or probably dating profile pictures or whatever it is that you want, right? So when you're going to create your thumbnail, you can actually create your thumbnails based on your own face. That is very unique that I'm trying to do over here. And the way that it works is that I'm training an ML model, an image model behind the scenes. So how does that work? I need to upload images for the model to know that it's you, right? Now, even in that case, the images that I'll be sending to the training model does not accept direct raw images. It expects a zip formatted folder. So how do I give it that? So what I do is that I submit the images to my backend using multi-part form data. And then I use something known as Multer, which is a very popular middleware for parsing files inside Node.js. Now, when it comes to configuring S3 on the server side, it's actually exactly the same in this case as well, because even inside our client side, we had to configure it, the S3 client on our server. So it's not going to be any different. In fact, it is the same package as well. Yeah, so over here, I'm passing in the region, the credentials I've already talked about. And I've created two utility functions over here. One is to upload to S3 and one is to create a signed URL. This is probably not being used anywhere because I'm directly uploading files to S3. Now, the important thing to note is that even over here, we are creating a new put object command. Very important. But we are not using that to upload. But on the client side, we are not using that to upload directly. Whereas over here, we are using the S3 client and this put object command to directly upload to S3. And yeah, that's what's happening over here. I'm creating a zip, boring logic you can find on the internet, not something unique that I'm doing. And over here, once the zip has been created, I'm uploading that zip to S3. And that zip URL is what I'm providing to my model to train. And yeah, it works pretty flawlessly. And yeah, if you actually want a more detailed code approach where I actually code all of this, just comment and I'll be sure to make it. Right now, I want you to understand the core concepts behind S3 and what's important and how we actually can handle it on a very fundamental level. Because once you get an understanding of the fundamental level, then you can do all of this yourself as well. But if you cannot, or if you need more help, then be sure to reach out to me, and I'll surely help you out. Yeah, that's been all from my side. Thank you.